President Muhammadu Buhari is reiterating the Nigerian government's determination to achieve 30 gigawatts of energy by the year 2030. He made the remark during the discussion panel on just energy transition at the ongoing U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C. He also outlined the comprehensive energy transition plan unveiled by his administration in response to issues associated with climate change. Our State House correspondent, Adesuwa Omoruan, reports from Washington, D.C.
President Buhari arrives the venue of the summit. It's his first engagement at the three-day high-level meeting between President Biden and African leaders. U.S. Secretary of State sets things in motion with his opening remarks.
We know that African nations have contributed relatively little to this crisis, but are disproportionately harmed by it. It's both unfair and unrealistic to ask them to turn their backs on economic development and opportunity in the name of a clean energy transition. To ask them, in effect, to forego what many of us have done in the past in developing our countries and our economies. And so we believe that the best way, indeed the just way, to address the climate crisis in Africa is to work together.
Many climate and environmental activists have criticized industrialized countries such as the U.S. for not accepting responsibility and liability for the climate crisis, not only as a moral obligation, but also to help finance climate adaptation actions on the continent. However, Mr. Blinken says the U.S. remains a partner in solving the crisis while announcing a $290 million investment in the Power Africa program.
The United States will work closely with African countries as they determine how best to meet their specific energy needs, understanding that for many, the clean energy transition will be a transition to consistent, reliable energy in the first place. We'll do so through programs like Power Africa, which has mobilized the public and private sectors to deliver cleaner, more reliable electricity to over 165 million people in sub-Saharan Africa who previously didn't have access. We're proud to announce a new investment of $290 million in that program. Combating the climate crisis, like so many other challenges we face, was actually championed by Africans in the first place. Indeed, in Africa, we see not only the stakes of this crisis, but also the solutions. Gabon has led the way in conserving its forest resources, which now absorb 140 million tons of CO2 every year, benefiting tens of thousands of people vulnerable to both floods and to droughts. Nigeria has set bold targets and robust regulations for methane reductions, the first country in Africa to do so, which could reduce air pollutants by a third and avert tens of thousands of deaths.
After that, the discussion on climate adaptation and the just energy transition went into closed session. With the cameras out and press asked to leave, President Buhari's spokesperson says the president made demands from the U.S. during his submission. He asked for Nigeria to be included in the G7's climate partnership list for co-creation of a just energy transition program. He also asked for considerable financial and technical support to achieve Nigeria's ambitious vision of 30 gigawatts of energy by the year 2030 with renewable energy mix. He says the success of clean energy in Nigeria and elsewhere in Africa will need concessional, low-interest capital-led investments. Meanwhile, earlier in the day, the president received members of the Abu Dhabi Foundation. They announced the conferment of the foundation's award on President Buhari for his efforts on peace and security.
It is to reinforce the work that the president is doing, promoting a bright future for young people who must be given a future that is free of intolerance, one rich in accommodation, full of brotherliness, and also for the entire West African sub-region, that yes, sacrifices are being made by Nigeria at home and in the neighborhood, and there is a recognition of the fact that the world is watching. They're seeing what he's doing, and they're coming to say, thank you to Nigeria.
Adesuwa, Omoruan, Arise News.
All right, for more on President Buhari's itinerary on the sidelines of the day's activities at the U.S.-Africa Summit, we are now being joined from Washington, D.C. by Arise correspondent Adesuwa Omoruan. Good day to you, Adesuwa. And let's get into it. We've just been discussing energy, but another milestone deal that has been reached, of course, are the Artemis Accords. Tell us about Nigeria and this interest to get into space travel development.
Okay, great to be here. Thank you for joining us here in Washington. You would recall and you would know that the colossal financial muscle needed in space exploration has kept a lot of developing countries out of that space. No pun intended there. But that's MOU we saw yesterday. I mean, Nigeria and Rwanda joining the Artemis Accord is a laudable one. In the days to come, we'll be hearing from experts on its importance for Nigeria at this time. But we do know that in our climate of today, in the world that we live in, space exploration is very important when it comes to streamlining communication, when it comes to monitoring climate change, climate crisis, even food and security. So it's definitely a good one for Nigeria, that one being in the bag. We know that Artemis really is a set of principles for nations to responsibly and cooperatively operate when it comes to outer space. And so again, would wait to hear from the experts to know just how important this is. The Minister of Communications, Issa Pantami, spoke about it yesterday after signing the accord. He did say this is very crucial and this is very huge for the country, but we would wait to hear more.
Well said, Adesuwa. And of course, in your fantastic report, you did mention the Nigerian government's determination to achieve the 30 gigawatts of energy by the year 2030. So now, if we're going to do a checklist, the will or the determination is in place. $290 million has been pledged by the United States for the Power Africa project. Is there any missing piece that would hinder this 30 gigawatts of energy becoming a reality by 2030?
Okay, so here it is. The $290 million pledged by Secretary of the United States government, announced by Secretary of State Antony Blinken yesterday for the Power Africa program, is not specifically for Nigeria's ambitious project for 2030. That Power Africa program was actually launched by President Barack Obama in 2013, if my memory serves me right. It is to power communities, to get more people, to double access to electricity on the African continent during the President Barack Obama administration. And of course, we know that President Biden was then the vice president. So this is not a new program for the US government and especially this administration. That is just to further that program. Of course, we should see some monies hopefully come to Nigeria when it comes to these targets, because President Muhammadu Buhari made a case that, Africa does have the potentials. Again, as pointed out by Secretary Blinken yesterday, that third of the minerals needed actually to build the technology for renewable energy batteries for turbine winds exist on the continent. We have the vast natural resources. However, we do not have the capacity, we do not have the capacity and the financial capabilities to harness those potentials. And that's where America hopes to come in, to work in partnership with Africa. So making a case yesterday, President Muhammad Buhari says, African countries are struggling with their economies. Now, if the world is in a race to a net zero economy, net zero world, and you're asking Africa to abandon the sort of energy it has, then you have to play a huge part. And of course, with the climate change crisis, we've heard environmentalists talk about the moral burden for developed countries such as the US, who are the greatest offenders when it comes to climate, when it comes to emissions and greenhouse gases, and so they have to pay, of course, the liability and be responsible for that. So making that case yesterday, President Buhari says, we have a project as Nigeria. We do have a policy. It's been approved by the Federal Executive Council meeting, Federal Council of the country this year, and this is what we hope to achieve. So we do have our plans in motion. All we need is the technical assistance and the monies. It is hoped that the United States will listen to such calls by Nigeria, the greatest, the largest country on the continent. Again, a prosperous Africa is a booster and bolsters global economy. So, however, we do expect to hear some positive results in that light.
Absolutely, and I can imagine there's so much lined up and so many other sectors that will be looked at. What does President Buhari's itinerary look like for the remainder of the summit?
Yes. So today, things are moving very fast, I must tell you. The summit opens in another 16 minutes today at 7 a.m. Today is dedicated to business, the U.S. Business Africa Forum. President Muhammadu Buhari and the Nigerian delegation will be participating actively in today's summit. A lot of sectors we've looked at. We've been told by government officials here that today we'll look at those sectors that include infrastructure, where the U.S. is lagging when China comes to the picture. We're also going to be looking at the digital economy, the tech sector, agro-business. Yesterday we had a meeting on AGOA. We don't have the details yet. Today we expect to see an MOU on the AFCFTA. That's a huge one, how America intends to trade with the continent multilaterally. We'll see how that plays out. President Muhammadu Buhari would also be meeting with President Biden, although we are told that there will be no one-on-one meetings with any African leaders. We have been told that President Biden will meet with countries who are having elections in 2023. And of course, you do know that Nigeria will be having its next round of elections come February 2023. So President Muhammadu Buhari is expected to be there. The African leaders will also head to the White House today for a dinner with President Biden. President Biden will give some remarks, closing session, presidential closing remarks, we're told. And of course, there will be other side events for President Muhammadu Buhari today. He's been receiving guests. Yesterday, he received some guests from the Abu Dhabi Foundation who conferred on him the award for his efforts in peace and security, not just in Nigeria, but in the sub-region. So it's a busy day for the Nigerian president and his team on ground here again.
Said Adesuwa, this is Cynthia, by the way. You touched on that, the president receiving members of the Abu Dhabi Foundation, and you've given us a bit of insight on what it means. But can you tell us about can you give us an in-depth significance of this meeting? Because I saw it in your report and you just mentioned it now, and I really want us to have a grasp of that, the significance of that meeting.
Oh, sorry, Cynthia, you must forgive me. I confused the voices this morning. Great. So, yes, that side event, it wasn't on the lineup. It's not uncommon to see such visits to the president at his residence or at his place of stay here in Washington, D.C. What they are basically saying is that the president has shown commitment to peace and security. Now, you may say some may receive that with some pinch of salt. It may be controversial to some people, especially with what Nigeria is dealing with at home. But again, if you compare the situation that we have on ground in Nigeria and what it was a year or two ago, some will actually say the President Muhammadu Buhari administration has tried to calm things down. In the sub-region, we've seen the role Nigeria has played. We've seen President Muhammadu Buhari's special envoy, former President Goodluck Jonathan, also make a lot of trips to these countries where we've seen unrest and how things have sort of calmed down. So it is not, far to say that the world is watching and has seen the efforts by President Muhammadu Buhari. There will be critics who say it is not enough. Because we still have some trouble spots back home in Nigeria with, of course, the group, the proscribed indigenous people of Africa, of Biafra, beg your pardon, IPOB, clamoring for, Biafra. So, again, Cynthia, it depends on the side of the divide you are. And, is the cup full or is it half empty? Has President Muhammadu Buhari actually ticked the box to create some peace and security in Nigeria and in the sub-region?
Very pertinent questions indeed. Adesuwa Omoruan, Rise News correspondent, thank you so much for that update from Washington, D.C. We look forward to hearing more.